Beyond the Spanish Wars of Succession came the loss of all American possessions in the period 1702 to 1813. The war began slowly in 1701, after the death of King Charles II of Spain, as the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI fought to protect his own claim to the Spanish inheritance. As Louis XIV began to expand his territories, England and the Dutch Republic entered on the Holy Roman Empire's side to check French expansion. Then, other states joined the coalition opposing France and Spain in an attempt to acquire new territories or to protect existing dominion. It was Charles II of Spain, known as the Bewitched, who on his deathbed nominated Philip V as his successor in 1700. Philip V of Anjou was the 16-year-old successor. But Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, known as Archduke Charles of Austria, claimed the throne of Spain and established his court in Barcelona. Fear of a Bourbon reign created the Anti-Bourbon Alliance, which included the British, Dutch and Portuguese, and they seized Gibraltar, Barcelona, Valencia and Zaragoza. But the Wars of Succession ended with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, and Philip V recaptured Barcelona. In 1700, these were the Spanish territories in Europe, which included Castile and Aragon, Flanders, Milan, Naples, Sicily and Sardinia. But by the Peace Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, Philip V lost the Netherlands possessions, Milan, Naples, Sicily and Sardinia, and also ceded to Britain Gibraltar and Minorca, besides agreeing to the asiento or slave trade for a period of 30 years, but kept all the American colonies. Philip V of Anjou first married Maria Luisa of Savoy and had 2 heirs. Louis I, whose reign began in 1724 and lasted just over 7 months, and Ferdinand VI, who reigned from 1746 to 1759. King Philip himself reigned for 2 periods, before and after Louis, and started the first wave of reforms to replenish Spanish coffers. Philip V of Anjou's second marriage was to Elizabeth Farnese of Parma, with whom she had a son, Charles, who became Charles III. This painting by Van Loo in 1743 shows King Philip V with his second wife, Elizabeth Farnese, and his 2 heirs, Ferdinand, Prince of Asturias, and King Charles of Naples, with their respective spouses. So, Philip V, and later Ferdinand VI, attempted to curb smuggling in the colonies and collect revenue to fill the depleted Spanish coffers, trying to reverse trade concessions awarded at Utrecht. For such purpose, Madrid garrisoned its colonial defences in the Caribbean and rebuilt the Armada. Under Philip V, Cardinal Alberoni and José Patiño, aided by Elizabeth Farnese, started reformist initiatives. But the king, afflicted by fits of manic depression, progressively fell victim to a deep melancholia and died in 1746. Yet Alberoni ignored the restrictions placed upon Spain by both the Utrecht and Bub treaties, requesting customs to make rigorous inspections of ships entering Spanish ports. Those inspections ignored the many immunities enjoyed by British vessels from customs inspections in Spanish ports and English warehouses. Thus, in 1716, when the excess tonnage of an English ship in Cartagena was embargoed, it caused a dispute with the South Sea Company. And fears that Spain did not obey the agreement of the treaties gave rise to the emergence of the Triple Alliance. The War of the Quadruple Alliance took place when Austria joined the other three, caused by Spanish attempts to recover territorial losses agreed by the 1713 Peace of Utrecht. Spain's principal problem was rampant contraband by French, British and Dutch vessels that operated with impunity in the Caribbean and South Atlantic, aided by a colonial bureaucracy riddled with corruption. An armed conflict with the Quadruple Alliance members erupted when Sir George Byng destroyed the Spanish force of Cape Passara near Sicily in 1718. Foreign Minister Craggs declared the Spanish trade corrections as a misconduct and violation of commitments. London declared war on the 17th of December 1718, and Versailles followed on January the 9th. Spain suffered decisive defeats as the British shelled shipyards along the Basque and Cantabrian coasts and later invaded Galicia. Displeased with his kingdom's military performance, in 1719 Philip V dismissed Cardinal Alberoni and gave him 3 weeks to leave Spain, but he adhered to the demands of the new Quadruple Alliance. Spain was constantly involved in international conflicts to protect treasures shipped to the peninsula from America, which constituted the envy of other nations. Hostilities during the Wars of Succession had the effect of reducing marine trade in the Spanish fleet to almost nothing. Even worse, later, in 1797, Because of the Cadiz blockade, Spain's contact with America was effectively cut off. Later, when Patiño came to power in 1726, his policy was 1. To circumvent concessions that allowed foreigners to penetrate the American trade through Cadiz by excluding the Genízaros, and 2. To rebuild the navy devastated at Cape Passaro and create a coast guard in the Caribbean to harass foreign contrabandists. Because the strategy of trading foreign merchants to become eligible and engage in commerce by naturalizing or marrying Spanish women to make their offspring Genízaros was outlawed, it shifted to the use of prestanombres, front men who shipped goods for a commission. But the policies of Patiño led to the War of Jenkins' Ear. As in 1731, Robert Jenkins claimed his ear was amputated by Spanish Coast Guard officers after they discovered contraband aboard his ship Rebecca. Response to the incident was tepid until several years later, when opposition politicians and the British South Sea Company played it up, hoping to spur outrage against Spain, believing that a victorious war would improve Britain's trading opportunities in the Caribbean. William Pitt, therefore, called for an end to Spanish depredations, and a declaration of war came in 1739. A British fleet under Edward Vernon captured Portobello in Panama and was reinforced by Commodore George Anson in 1740, who attacked Santiago de Cuba, but after a failed British offensive, withdrew to Guantanamo. Good fortune lent Spain a hand when yellow fever arrived on time. Although British control lasted just 3 weeks, the effect on Portobello was devastating. The second phase of reforms under Ferdinand VI, that started in 1746, were entrusted to Marqués de la Ensenada and José Carvajal. These reforms ended the sale of colonial bureaucratic appointments, liberalized trade with South America, and curtailed the power of the Church by 1750. José del Campillo also ordered that cargoes to America be measured as a new level of royal control. This put an end to political corruption in the Indies and stopped the monopoly rights of Cadiz, allowing the Genízaros to participate in trade. The 1750 Treaty of Madrid, forged by José de Carvajal, saw the British surrender the 4 remaining years of the Asiento in exchange for a payment of £100,000 and British trade with Spanish America under favourable conditions. The treaty ended the War of the Austrian Succession and established new borders between Spanish and Portuguese American empires, ceding much territory to the Portuguese. The Spanish crown leaned towards a British reconciliation by the sympathetic actions of Queen Barbara and developed a unified system after it freed itself from the impositions of Utrecht. Ensenada, pleased with the previous results, focused his priority into strengthening the Armada by building 50 ships of the line in Havana. In 1751, Madrid sponsored the forced distribution of goods by rural magistrates to colonial indigenous communities. Thus, corregidores forced Andeans to consume inferior merchandise at inflated prices. The practice persisted until 1781 in the wake of the Tupac Amaru revolt. The downfall of Ensenada was orchestrated by Ricardo Wall, a Spanish-Irish chief minister as a diplomat in London, with British ambassador Benjamin Keane and the Duke of Huesca, after the allegation of military activity against the British dyewood outposts along the Mosquito Coast in Honduras. The creative period of Ensenada ended when he was toppled from power in 1759 and King Charles III retained Wall as Prime Minister. Wall lacked the quality of leadership and attempted to resign. Earlier, in 1758, Queen Barbara's death was followed in 1759 by Ferdinand VI, after a bout of depression and madness. This royal couple produced no children who survived. Between the date of his wife's death and his own, Ferdinand fell into a state of prostration in which he would not even dress. The loss of his wife drove him to complete lunacy. After the death of Ferdinand VI, Charles III, his half-brother, empowered his mother, Elizabeth Farnese, to govern Spain until his arrival from Naples and Sicily. And he continued with fresh reforms, but Spain was dragged into the 7 Years' War. The British in 1762 declared war, and 200 warships trapped the Spanish fleet in the Havana harbor. Governor Juan de Prado capitulated, and the Treaty of Paris in 1763 ended the conflict. The British gave up Havana in return for Florida, and the French ceded Louisiana to Spain. Louisiana became a colony of the Kingdom of France in 1682, before passing to Spain in 1763. In 1800, Napoleon reacquired Louisiana from Spain in exchange for territories in Tuscany by the Third Treaty of San Ildefonso. Later, it became part of the United States, following its purchase in 1803 for $15 million borrowed from British bankers. In the third phase of the reforming agenda, under Charles III, from 1759 to 1788, higher military outlays encouraged the increase of taxes throughout the empire and the introduction of anti-Creole laws. The Creoles were squeezed out of governing posts, as Spain only appointed peninsulares as functionaries to offices that decided important affairs, deeming them more loyal to the crown. Those policies and royal monopolies, created for coveted commodities, led to a dramatic increase in crown revenues, but also to much discontent amongst displaced governing colonial Creole officials. In this way, colonial strategy shifted from a culture of consensus to one of confrontation. This graph shows the extent of taxation Spain extracted from the American colonies under 4 monarchs that led to the loss of consensus with the colonial governors and further confrontation. A great proportion of such funds were destined to support various wars Spain fought with other European countries. Such acts in colonial America under Charles III had the effect of encouraging revolt and sedition amongst Creoles, who witnessed how unfair taxation under George III led to North American independence, while the same situation in France under Louis XVI toppled the monarchy. The Enlightenment ideas present in the world, plus the work of Adam Smith, Thomas Paine's criticism of European monarchies, and Rousseau and Voltaire arguing for freedom, equality and the will of the people, fanned the flames of change in colonial Latin America. Therefore, in 1782, the Creole Juan Vicente Bolívar composed a letter proposing revolution and sent it to his countryman and independence mentor Francisco de Miranda in London. He complained that the Spanish were treating all Americans like slaves, but expressed some trepidation and said, "We want to take no steps, for in your prudence we have set all our hopes." Creoles were subjected to punishing taxes. No American was allowed to own a mine. Factories were forbidden, and Basque business controlled the shipping trade. All revenues were sent directly to Spain without benefiting the local sources. The new restrictions irritated colonial elites, and popular revolts threatened the central regions of the empire. The first challenge to the reforms took place in Quito, with further bloody uprisings in Santa Fe de Bogotá and the southern Andes. There were risings in Cochabamba and Oruro in 1730 and 1739, and the Oruro Plan might have served as a model for later movements. The Jesuits were expelled in 1766, accused of encouraging riots, and their estates passed to the crown. Thus the Andes became the seedbed for revolt and sedition, and from mid-century the insurrection quickened, reflecting the heavy fiscal pressure the monarchy applied to the colonies. In 1781, in Chayanta, North Potosí, Thomas Catari was the leader of another uprising. The Spanish authorities were deeply shaken by 4 major rebellious upheavals and a further one that was skillfully subverted in Chile by the work of local officials. But the most substantial Indian revolt against the Spanish reforms was by Tupac Amaru. It took place in 1780, shortly after North American independence, because of general discontent in Spanish America. Amaru was captured by the Spanish and his body dismembered in the square of Cusco as an example to all other insurgents. In the wake of the Tupac Amaru revolt, Madrid created a tribunal in Cusco in 1787 and continued excluding Creoles from appointments in the new audiencias. Charles III used silver bullion from the Indies, despite a drain by expensive wars, to maintain fiscal solvency and to support armies deployed in Peru and New Granada to suppress angry taxpayers. Financing the colonial defense system by expansion of garrisons in America proved costly. Count of Ricla and Alejandro O'Reilly proposed arming the American subjects, a step that had long-term dangerous implications as those armies controlled their own destinies. In 1788, because a hunting chill turned into a fatal fever, Charles IV succeeded Charles III and continued the reforming policies of his distinguished father. He spent 39% of the budget rebuilding the Armada, but Godoy's economic policies increased discontent within the regime. By 1794, the Spanish Armada had grown to be the second largest in the world. Obviously, crown reforms and American remittances had worked. But in 1796, France forced Godoy to an alliance and to a war with Britain. Wars with Great Britain devastated the Spanish naval power that 3 successive kings struggled to rebuild and cut off Spain from its colonies, destroying their monopoly of trade with the Indies. In 1797, during the Anglo-Spanish War, John Jervis defeated José de Córdoba and sunk much of the Spanish fleet off Cape St. Vincent along the Portuguese coast. Later, after the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, Spain's ability to control the colonies lessened even more. By 1807, no treasure ships arrived at Cadiz. The country was sunk into an economic depression as remittances from the Atlantic world were the Achilles heel of Spain. Meanwhile, in the Spanish court, Ferdinand VII, exasperated seeing all the power of the kingdom in the hands of Godoy, whom he mortally hated, was anxious to ascend to the throne, but feared Godoy planned to exclude him from the succession and take the throne in his own name. Because his father, Charles IV, was in comparatively vigorous health, Ferdinand decided on an attempt to expedite his departure. Therefore, Ferdinand VII tried to poison Carlos IV. But Godoy detected the plot and told King Carlos IV, who then wanted to send his son to the scaffold. Yet the Madrid crowds saved Ferdinand, as they hated Godoy, and the king had no choice but to abdicate in favour of Ferdinand VII to please the crowds. Napoleon was informed that the Bourbons of Spain, while professing friendship, had entered into a secret pact with England. He then remarked, "Nothing will induce me to recognize Ferdinand, and I cannot permit Spain to form an alliance with Britain." This was the situation when the Madrid mob drove Carlos IV from the throne by abdication in March 1808 in favor of his son. But after Ferdinand VII himself abdicated in May 1808 in favor of Napoleon, these three royals left for Bayonne in the newly imposed French exile. Because Spain demanded to be rescued from the debasement into which years of royal misrule had plunged her, Napoleon entered Spain and replaced the Bourbons with his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King of Spain from 1808 to 1813. Almost all layers of society in the Americas were antagonized by the Bourbon reforms. There was a lot of Spanish resistance to Bonaparte in the Iberian Peninsula because of the French takeover. The situation was depicted by Goya through his painting Los Fusilamientos de Mayo. Such action provoked national uprisings. The people expressed discontent on the 2nd of May 1808 as the Spaniards rallied to King Ferdinand and sent envoys to Britain seeking assistance. Viscount Castlereagh had a British expeditionary force ready for commitment that only came into action after the Peninsular invasion. Napoleon's invasion of Spain not only provided a massive distraction and tied up Spanish troops and ships, but it pushed many undecided Creoles over the edge in favor of independence. Rule by France was an outrage, even for New World's loyalists. Many men and women who would have otherwise supported the royalist side now joined the insurgents. When Viscount Beresford from Great Britain attacked and captured Buenos Aires in 1806 to 1807, Spain could not defend the city, and the local Creole militia had to recover it. The crisis in Spain led to the appearance of juntas to take control of the kingdom. The Seville junta was the supreme one, and it sent commissioners to rule all Spanish territories, including the viceroyalties in South America. The territories in the American colonies were allowed to elect representatives, but as peninsulars were favored over Americans, this sparked political problems. The political upheaval in Spain led to the formation of cabildos or town councils in the Americas, and in the absence of the king, Americans took radical decisions for their future. The effects of the Santa Fe junta were soon copied by other regions in New Granada, so there was political mobilization everywhere. Because of weak Spanish rule and its military forces tied up, the colonial influence in the New World decreased markedly, and the Creoles felt more ignored than ever. The loosening of Spanish control further encouraged those plotting subversion, like Simón Bolívar and Francisco de Miranda, to continue advocating insurrection to achieve complete independence from Spain. In 1810, the junta in Caracas, in the Captaincy General of Venezuela, still claiming loyalty to Ferdinand, went a step further and rejected the authority of the Spanish Council of Regency that had succeeded the central junta in Cádiz. Andrés Bello was the first independence thinker. Francisco de Miranda followed and was the main activist. He had his residence listed as 27 Grafton Way, London. It was the South American centre where the intellectual basis for insurrection was hatched. His principal fellow liberators were Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, Antonio José de Sucre, and Bernardo O'Higgins. Miranda became mentor to Bolívar, San Martín, and O'Higgins, and in his library in London they discussed the strategies for insurrection. Following their independence plan, Miranda decided to sail separately to Venezuela after Bolívar's return on the 5th of December 1810 and participated in the creation of the First Republic. The First Republic began with the overthrow of the Spanish colonial authorities and the establishment of the Supreme Junta of Caracas on April 19, 1810. Meanwhile, in Argentina, the first military campaigns against the Royalists were waged by Manuel Belgrano. Viceroy Rafael de Sobremonte was deposed by the Creoles, and the Royalist defeat was followed by civil war. San Martin's army in 1810 started the gradual formation of several independent states and ended with the declaration of Argentine independence on July 9, 1816. Yet later, in 1813, when Ferdinand VII was restored as King of Spain, he wanted to obliterate those independence movements in South America. He abolished the 1812 Spanish Constitution, established a reign of absolutism, and raised an army of 15,000 men headed by Pablo Morillo that travelled to Venezuela and New Granada to attack the insurgent armies. The final independence battle of Ayacucho on December 9, 1824, between Royalist forces led by De la Serna and Canterac against Sucre, was at Pampa de la Quinoa in Peru. The battle was fierce. There was no hiding place, and the patriots bayoneted the Royalists. Canterac offered unconditional surrender, perhaps in terror of Bolívar's barbarian hordes. De la Serna was wounded and carried off the field. Sucre offered the Royalists safe passage to Spain and sent a report to Bolívar saying, "The battle for Peru is complete." Because Viceroy José de la Serna was wounded during the Battle of Ayacucho, his second-in-command, General José de Canterac, signed the Royalist Army final capitulation. These events brought about the downfall of colonial Spain. After the Battle of Ayacucho, Spain was evicted from the American shores forever. On September 15, 1821, 6 nations of Central America united together to sign their independence. They signed a plan drafted by Agustín de Iturbide, liberating them from Spain. The region of Central America before independence was known as the Captaincy General of Guatemala. It included the present-day countries of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. The Mexican War of Independence from 1810 to 1821 was an armed conflict between the people of Mexico and the Spanish colonial authorities. The conflict started on the 16th of September 1810, and the movement was led by Mexican-born Spaniards, mestizos, and Amerindians. The leader of the independence movements in the Viceroyalty of New Spain, Mexico, was the priest Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. Hidalgo succeeded in mobilizing the Indian and mestizo population of central Mexico, killing at least 2,000 peninsulares. By the beginning of the 1820s, Britain's Foreign Secretary George Canning and US President James Monroe were competing in an effort to give support to and gain influence in an increasingly independent Latin America. Later, President Monroe articulated his doctrine with the annual message to Congress on December 2, 1823. The European powers, according to Monroe, were obligated to respect the Western Hemisphere as the United States' sphere of interest. This map shows the dates and the instigators for independence that lasted over a decade. The uprisings started in Bogotá in 1810, continued in Peru and Venezuela with the formation of the First and Second Republics, and ended in 1819. Simón Bolívar was the liberator for this northern area. In Paraguay, the movement started in 1811, and José Rodríguez de Francia proclaimed independence in 1813. In Argentina, it was José de San Martín that declared independence in 1816, and Bernardo O'Higgins did so in Chile in 1818. In Mexico, Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla led the liberation in 1821, and in Central America on the same date, Agustín de Iturbide obtained independence for the various republics. In 1822, Ecuador declared independence, and so did Dom Pedro in Brazil, as Emperor and perpetual defender of Brazil. Spain signed the final capitulation in 1824 in the Alto Peru, and José de Sucre informed Bolívar that Spain no longer was the colonial master in the Americas. In Uruguay, Gervasio Artigas defeated Spanish troops in 1811 and broke with Buenos Aires. Portuguese troops invaded later in 1816, and the Treaty of Montevideo in 1828, fostered by the UK, finally gave birth to an independent Uruguay as a buffer state between Brazil and Argentina.